Hola, you lovely specimens. It's Quadix here, and we're doing What If Naruto could edit seals slash was a seal master and neglected. Kushina is alive, and the Ninetales is sealed inside his sister. The story is called Seal Keeper, He Who Binds. The link will be in the description. His sister may have been given the QB, but armed with Namikaze Minato's greatest sealing masterpiece, Uzumaki Naruto will carve his way to the shinobi world, one body at a time. Let's get into this. The excitement in the air rang more clearly than the academy bell ever could have, as countless students raced out from their first day, eager to tell parents and siblings about what they had and would learn under the tutelage of experienced Chunin instructors. At the front of this great mass, one boy stood at most prominently. His bright red hair reaching his shoulders was an oddity in the village of Konohagakure, shared by only one other inhabitant. Skin more pale than the glowing moon, ethereal quality that hinted at him being more a lost spirit than a being of flesh and blood. His eyes, however, were probably the feature that most took notice. Deep pools of amethyst that seemed to shine with the light of a million stars. He was well known in this village, a reminder of what the great Kyuubi no Kitsune's attack 8 years ago. He was one of the only 2 children born that day, and by far the one that seemed most unnatural. There was no doubt that he had been born as an omen, or even that his birth had been the cause of the Kyuubi's attack, drawing the great beast to their village. The wounds remained painfully fresh within them all. The boy who unfortunately was ignorant to the memories and horror he invoked within his fellow villagers and instead looked eagerly about the open field for his mother and sister. The centers of his tiny universe. Confusion seeped into him as the seconds ticked by without any sign of them. Seconds turned to minutes, and minutes into nearly an hour. The field was long since emptied, and he stood alone in the dying light of the evening sun. Naruto? He turned to whoever had called his name, only to be met with the sight of his instructor Umino Iruka. The Chunin held with his hands a small stack of papers and had obviously just left the building to head home for the night. Frowning, the man looked down at Naruto in concern. "Where's your mother?" Iruka asked. "Or Yushi? Surely she'd have sent her old student to pick you up if she was unable to." I don't know. I thought they'd be here." It was barely a whisper, but Iruka heard the last part clearly enough. They promised. The sun had long since set, the full moon taking over, throwing it and taking the kingdom of heaven for itself. Sitting upon its midnight throne, it gazed down upon the young boy traversing the streets, bathing him in its luminescent radiance. What boy could have been wandering the streets of the clan district by the light of the moon? Red hair easily answered as Uzumaki Naruto, son of Kushina and suspected son of the Yondaime Hokage Namikaze Minato, as he made his way home. Iruka had been kind enough to take him out for a bowl of ramen to make up for the fact that no one had come for him. Feeling quite a bit better with a belly full of hot noodly goodness, he had thanked his new sensei, bid him farewell, and made his way home. Coming to the gate that bore the traditional Uzumaki spiral, he couldn't help but feel that something was off. Shrugging away the uncomfortable feeling, he pressed onwards, placing his hand upon the door so that it could recognize his chakra. It didn't. Ice formed within his chest, a hollow horror that seeped into his entire being. He hoped he was wrong after a small jolt of pain had been sent up his arm, a warning to those who did not have permission to enter the compound. You would only ever receive one warning. Just as the seals stored signatures that were allowed onto the property, they also stored the signatures of those who tried to gain access without permission. If the small pulse of chakra it forcefully pushed back into your chakra system wasn't deterrent enough, it would unleash a much larger amount in any subsequent attempts. The large pulse wasn't just plain chakra either. For years, both Mito and Kushina had siphoned off small amounts of the Kyuubi's chakra into the matrix. At this point in time, Naruto knew that there had to be at least 3 full tails of coercive chakra stored, waiting to lash out at the second it was given a target. 3 tails of the Kyuubi's chakra would probably be the equivalent to the Gobi, instant death. Luckily, for those like himself looking to push their luck and hoping against hope that they would be recognized, it did not release it all at once. A tenth of a tail, or approximately 1/7 of the Gobi, would be released. It was by no means safe, but it wasn't instant death, at least. Silver linings, right? Taking a deep breath, he prepared to test his Uzumaki luck. This was stupid. He knew it was stupid, but he really didn't have any other options. He didn't have any friends to stay with. He didn't know where Kurenai lived. The lights in the compound were out, though suspiciously early at that. And he really didn't want to sleep out here during a cold autumn night. Steeling his resolve, he once more touched the gate. Pain flooded his body. Small drops of acid spread, a ravenous beast that devoured everything it encountered as it coursed through his veins. He was aware of screaming, his own most likely, but he felt an odd detachment from the sound that failed to invoke any recognition within his heart. No, there was no time for such a trivial thing when he was busy feeling his innards liquefy and weakened bones shatter under the unexpected strain of the melted muscle. The smell of burning flesh assaulted his nose as his skin shriveled away and the taste of his own blood filled his mouth. Perhaps he should have slept outside tonight instead, taking chance with the freezing temperatures. Hainokuni's autumn nights were known for. A slow death by freezing would have been preferable to this, as would have been the wild animals that prowled the edge of the village, such as the clan compounds. During the night, a natural defense that had stopped its share of foreign shinobi attempting to sneak into the village. His head began to feel light as darkness grasped for him, numbing the fiery agony and leaving instead a biting cold that twisted at his struggling heart and threatened to smother his soul into oblivion. The last thing he was ever aware of before he shrunk into the cold waters of nothingness embrace was a seal on his right arm, glowing an angry red, and a single voice filled with distress echoing in his mind. Naruto. It's weird, he thought, staring at his right arm, to think I would only learn of their departure after laying alone in the hospital for a week. Indeed, it was only yesterday, his 7th day recovering from the rejection of the clan compound, that he had learned that both his mother and sister had left the village on clan business for an indeterminate amount of time. He had tried many times to distract himself from the thought of their departure, but it was futile. In the end, his thoughts always made their way to them, 2 suns that sat in the center of his universe. No, had sat. They were gone now. Either the suns had left, or while orbiting them, he had shot off into the darkness of space, lost from their comforting light. He didn't know what explanation he would prefer. Well, that explained why Naruto didn't come with me to the academy today. I should have found that odd considering how much she wants to be a shinobi. Trying once again to rid his mind of such thoughts, he resumed his staring, trying to decipher the markings on his right arm, despite not having been trained in seals. No, That's what Mother's going to be going over with Naruto while they're gone. He let out a quick curse he had heard one of Kurenai's friends say as his mind was brought to them once more. It was slightly easier to distract himself with his next thought, but that did precisely little to make himself feel better. Where is Kurenai anyway? Surely she'd come up to check on me at the very least, and I'd have expected my mother to leave me in her care if she knew she was leaving for what may prove to be several years. A deep sigh was let out. Even if she was assigned to watch me, I'm not sure she'd be happy about it. She's not all that fond of Naruto, but she doesn't really try to hide it when it comes to me. It wasn't hard to see that she hated him, and he really couldn't blame her. The red-eyed woman saw his mother as her own, and with the birth of him and his twin, she had lost most of Kushina's attention. She disliked them for that, but an effort to be polite with his sister, whom she hoped to mold into her own sister, or perhaps even daughter. You really couldn't tell with that woman. It didn't help his case that not only did he have the facial features of his father, her own father figure, but he was like his father, male. Kurenai had always had trouble with men, never feeling safe or comfortable in their presence, and to her, he was no different despite resembling his father to such a degree. She had only ever felt comfortable with Minato, and it probably wouldn't be too far off to say she had harbored feelings for the older man. In fact, the fact that he reminded her of the love interest she lost wouldn't give him any points in her book either. Heck, with his absolute lack of Uzumaki, luck, he wouldn't be surprised if she felt his very existence was mocking her, taking from her everything she had held precious in her life. Dude, imagine hating on a child. Kurenai out here like a teacher. In that case, maybe it was better if they didn't interact, especially with his mother and sister gone. She really only ever tried for their sakes. Without them, their interactions could quickly sour. So far, both of their sakes and the sakes of Naruto and Kushina, mutually avoidance should prove the best course of action. Using his left hand, he gently massaged the bridge of his nose. Thoughts like this were getting him nowhere. His arm captured his attention again, drawing a frown. The seal itself evidently had already been there, rather than being the result of the compound's safety measure. However, the gate had made it visible. It probably would have appeared if he had focused on it, but he had been completely unaware of its existence. Channeling large amounts of chakra was almost guaranteed to reveal the presence of a seal, even those that sealed chakra. He had never actually tried channeling large amounts of chakra to his arms for any reason, so it was understandable that he hadn't come to know of it that way. The questions left then were, what was it, and who knew of it? The acting Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, had seemed surprised by it, saying it resembled something he had seen before, and then proceeded to excuse himself. No doubt to try and figure out what it was that had appeared upon his flesh. At this point, all they knew was that it was something connected to the Shinigami's curse mark, which was on the left side of his chest. Considering that fact, it was likely related to the sealing of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, which currently resided within the 8 trigram seal on his sister's abdomen. Known to most within the village, his sister served as the cage for the mighty Bijou. Known to far and fewer, he was the warden. The seal on his sister was not so much a seal as it was a pocket dimension anchored to this world by her chakra system, keeping the Kyuubi somewhere they could watch over it. It was a curse mark on his chest that was the seal in this case, keeping the giant fox within that dimension using the power of the Shinigami who had branded him with its touch. But this new seal was somehow connected to it, and he wasn't sure why. His first thought had been that it was the key to the 8 trigram seal, but it was known to those fully informed about the sealing that Minato had trusted that to the Toad Sage, to the Toad summons of Myobokuzan. So with that option gone, his second guess had been that it would allow him to siphon some of the Kyuubi's chakra into himself. This would allow him to have a boost in combat, store extra energy for the emergencies, or perhaps absorb any chakra his sister begun leaking. It was a logical conclusion, especially considering that 2 days after the accident his healing had rapidly accelerated due to the traces of the Kyuubi's chakra supercharging his Uzumaki healing. But even that felt off. The chakra, for one, did not seem to be originating from this new seal, but rather from the Shinigami's mark itself. There was also a calling he felt deep with him, a whisper he wouldn't fully make out, but he had known that while it wasn't coming from the seal, his seal seemed to act to it. Come to think of it, the voice came from the curse mark, just like the Kyuubi's chakra. Could it have been the Kyuubi reaching out to its warden for some reason? It would have to be looked into sometime in the near future. Of course, that begged one final question. Was this new seal reacting to the Biju or the seal on his sister? Or more importantly, why? Released from the care of the hospital, Naruto was at a loss as what to do next. Now with no friends, no family, and the clothes that survived his encounter with the clan compound, which amounted to his underwear and pants with only minor rips in the bottom. He was suddenly homeless, hungry, and alone. He should go to the academy for the rest of the afternoon, but lacking clothes as he was, he'd probably be sent back home. He could try begging, but he was known as the child of the Kushina. They would probably assume he was just trying to get some spending money, so that wouldn't work. Besides, if he remembered anything his mother had ever told him, it was that Uzumaki don't beg. So he'd have to find some way to provide for himself with no skills, little experience doing any sort of work, and without the strength of physical labor. Perhaps honest work wasn't an option in his case. No, I'm better than that, he thought, shaking his head, but a small part of him spoke otherwise. You're going to be a ninja, it said. You might as well get used to the dishonest work. That's just my hunger talking. Naruto assured himself he'd figure something out for the short term, and when that was taken care of, he'd look forwards to a long-term solution. Everything would be just fine. Too soon, perhaps, he had previously spoken. Now cloaked in a rough brown piece of brown fabric with a makeshift scarf hiding his face, he searched for a target. I could go directly from the source, take what I need, mused the redhead, or I could have acquired the means to obtain it elsewhere, reducing of the chances of me being found out. He sighed. I can't believe I only managed 2 days before being reduced to this, he thought in disgust. Shaking off his self-loathing, he continued to contemplate targets. Hidden as he was, it was unlikely that he would be spotted before he made his move. The shadow of a building covered him as he crouched atop a low roof. More rooms extended above him, meaning passing shinobi would cross right over him, and the roof extended far enough out onto the main road of the Konoha marketplace that people would be hard pressed to make him out so long as they didn't know his location. A shinobi would have plenty of money on them, but chances of me obtaining it and getting away are slim to none. Civilians don't carry much due to the ninja, keeping it safe within banks until required. So I need to find someone just withdrew from the bank or someone arrogant enough to think themselves safe. 2.5 hours passed before he spotted a potential mark. The man was not small, a walking mountain of muscle, and he carried himself with confidence. Tattoos covered almost every inch of his visible skin, and he seemed quite pleased with himself. A quick glance to the building he had left revealed a bar. Drinking? This early? No, not just drinking. must have been gambling in the back. Because shinobi like to operate at night, those of ill repute tend to handle their vices during the day. Seeing as it was just before noon, this man was probably finished for the day and ready to enjoy his winnings for the next couple of hours before retreating to his den. Having made up his mind, he carefully stalked his chosen target, careful to stay behind the rooftop world of returning shinobi and the occasional guards and the civilian crowds below. He was far too suspicious for either. The red light district. I'm not surprised. Despite the early time of day, the red light district was roaring with activity as the more seedy citizens conducted less than savory business. Seedy citizens like the one he was following, and considering what he was and was going to be doing, he probably fit in the category now too. Fantastic. His mark approached one of the many provocative people on the street, no doubt looking to enjoy his winnings to the fullest. The woman took a single glance at the amount of the man had in his bag before latching onto his arm, more than happy to relieve him of it. This made it a bit harder, but at the same time his target's guard had dropped substantially. He was going to be a shinobi. He could work with this. After all, it was just a civilian and a dove. What could go wrong? One kunai, an old one at that, was all he had to work with. It would have to suffice. He'd attempt to cut away the bag first, but if that didn't work, he'd stab him and bolt. Hopefully the pain would loosen the man's grip, with a silent prayer to Lady Luck for good fortune, and another one to death, in hopes of being just as swift and silent. Naruto steeled his nerves and dropped not 2 feet from the man as the pair made their way through an alley to run-down motel located off the main road. The man proved more aware than he seemed, spinning to face the cloaked brat that had suddenly appeared. Consequently, the bag under his arm was now much more accessible. Lunging for it, Naruto attempted for the straps that had been looped over the man's left shoulder. The man had other plans, and the boot Naruto took to the face made it well known. Dang brat, think you can get the drop on me, eh? I'll teach you a thing or two, the man shouted as he moved toward the recovering child. Naruto regained his senses quickly, but evidently it wasn't fast enough. He received a solid fist to his gut for his effort. Crap, this isn't going to end well. Grabbing onto the man's arm with one hand, he thanked the gods he had managed to keep a firm grip on his kunai. His first swipe went for the arm, which was ripped back violently, and while the man held his new cut and spewed a string of venomous curses, Naruto kept going, lodging his blade within the man's gut. Unfortunately, it would not be that easy. With a mighty roar, the muscle mountain charged, knocking Naruto into the wall. While it had thus far, that was the last his disguise could take, as his scarf pulled at his feet and his hood was jostled off his head off the red hair. Huh? The Uzumaki, Brad. What, did your mother not give you enough pocket money today, boy? Asked the giant before spitting at the boy's feet. Well, it doesn't matter now. You chose poorly when you made your mark, and you lost any chance of escaping with a good beating and a lesson learned when you lodged this. He pulled the kunai and tossed it at Naruto, hitting him in his left shoulder. In me, say your prayers. Fool, this is your end. He reached down and plucked him up by the neck. Grabbing for the kunai to finish the job, he was ill-prepared for the small foot that had made contact with his manhood. He dropped the boy with a howl, temporarily flailing to his knees. But it was enough time for Naruto to get into a favorable position. With adrenaline pumping through his veins and his life on the line, he didn't hesitate when a voice shouted, "End him." His foot moved in a flash, kicking his scarf back up to him, and the boy wasted no time twisting behind and wrapping it around the man's neck, pulling tight. While the man struggled to breathe, the shinobi to be prepared to make his first kill. The kunai came out easily enough. dripping blood all over the ground, but he ignored the throbbing pain the removal brought him and instead helped the kunai further stain the ground. With one quick move, the kunai was plunged through the scarf and into the soft flesh of the man's neck. He was ended, unable to utter a sound, and mentally exhausted Naruto momentarily collapsed onto his knee on the back of the corpse. His momentary respite was interrupted by a choked, panicked sobbing. He let his eyes wander for the source, half on guard and half ready to fall asleep where he kneeled. Considering he was atop a corpse, that was less than a desirable course of action, but he really couldn't find it within him to care. Oh, you forgot about her. The Lady of the Night, or rather in this case the Lady of the Late Morning, was packed against the wall, tears streaming down her face as he stared at him in fear. Giving a weary sigh, he smiled. He pulled himself up and picked up his spoils. Is this really all that blood is worth? He wanted to feel bad about what he had just done, but he really couldn't find it within him. This world really is kill or be killed, he mused, turning away from the woman and staring down the alleyway. I need this money. Unfortunately, he was in the way. She needed that money too. Another part of him reminded him. He paused, frowning, and he looked over his shoulder at the terrified woman. She wasn't gorgeous, especially with the tears streaming down her cheeks and mud covering the clothes she had ripped when she had fallen, but she held a rather plain attractiveness. I mean, that's just weird. I'm not doing that. She had blonde hair cut short, probably to make it easier for her to maintain, and vibrant emerald eyes, judging by the hair color alone. She was probably from the Yamanaka clan. There weren't many within the clans that weren't shinobi, but every so often one would be born that didn't have the desire or aptitude for it. They usually weren't well received by even their own families. It was most likely why this one was working in such a place. Light skin was fairly clean, or would have been if she had not fallen in the ground. She wasn't anything special, but she was certainly good looking. Not reading that. There was something about her that called to him. He wasn't sure if it was the tears or the fear her eyes showed. Maybe it was how she was trembling in the mud and grime, but his young heart couldn't help but reach out to her. He saw no reason he shouldn't do the same. Turning back to her, and he walked until he was standing next to her, gazing down at her trembling form. Kneeling down beside her, he reached into his bag and withdrew what was easily a good 90,000. Here, he urged, it's only fair you get your cut, seeing as I ended your client. Now that she knew he meant her no harm, confidence seemed to rush back into her. There was little doubt that she was of Yamanaka blood now. What's fair, little one, would be if you replace my client. I'm not a charity case, you know? I don't accept anything I don't work for. Her voice was surprisingly soft and melodic, but carried an almost haughty tone that momentarily caught him off guard. Regarding his composure, he responded as best as he could. I am 8. Which is a very fair point, if you think about it. She laughed, both having agreed to save the conversation for elsewhere. He had given her his makeshift cloak to wipe off as much mud as she could before throwing it back on, determined to keep his identity hidden. Likewise, the bloodied scarf was once more wrapped around his face, filling his nose with a tinge of copper. He ignored it and instead followed behind the blonde person. She led him to a quaint little restaurant. What? Led him to a quaint little restraint that was located off the main road. I think it was a restaurant. It's supposed to be a restaurant at least. Allowing for a small semblance of privacy as they took a shaded seat at a table in its outside dining area. Ordering the two sipped their tea. The Naruto had a bit of trouble when it came to that, and waited a comfortable silence for the meals to arrive. The bustling of Konoha nearby market district, leaving a pleasant hum in the early afternoon air. Oh, hold up. Let me mute that. Don't worry, it's not you getting Discord messages. It's the video. Ordering. Oh, I already read that. After their meals had been served and eaten, the postponed discussion resumed. As I was saying earlier, started Naruto, it's only fair that you get some of the money. By all rights, it was yours soon enough. And like I said, little shinobi, I didn't actually get a chance to earn that money. If you want me to have it, higher. Even as young as you are. Okay, alright, that's crazy. Not personally, that's crazy. He gave her an odd look in response, prompting another laugh from the woman. Look, he paused, waiting for her name, which she supplied easily enough. Tatsuki, formerly Yamanaka Tatsuki. Naruto continued. Look, Tatsuki, we both know you would have earned it, and as you... Why are we reading this still? And as you mentioned, I took away your chance to earn it. Consider it your rightful compensation. You talk pretty words, boy. Surprising for someone who claims to be A, she grinned. But I'm not backing down. If you're so determined to give me a cut, prove it to me. Hire me for the day and we can go our separate ways. Satisfied? He shook his head. I'm not doing that, Tatsuki. Not now. So instead, how about we cut a little deal? Her interest was piqued as she leaned in close, managing to cross most of the small table so that her face was uncomfortably close to his own. Despite having been covered in mud not an hour earlier, she smelled good. That's what you noticed, buddy? That's what you focus on? What kind of deal are we talking about? Advanced payment, answered the redhead. I give you your rightful cut now, and you give me a bit more for a reservation when I'm a bit older. That's crazy. Letting a thoughtful frown cross her face, she leaned back and folded her arms under her chest. After a moment, she gave him a sultry smirk. Alright, kid. You got yourself a deal. He gave a relieved sigh and withdrew the original 90,000 he had been planning to give her, before throwing an extra 10,000. Will this be sufficient? Was his inquiry. Her grin only grew as she quickly counted it for herself. 100,000, and I get to do a boy as cute as you, bro. I feel like I'm getting the better end of the bargain for the first time in a while. Then we have an accord. Shall we shake on it? Something within him felt odd, though not entirely unpleasant, as she gave him a hungry look. She shook... Bro, what is this? Anka? She shook her head and gave a laugh that had his heart racing for reasons he couldn't comprehend. No, I've got a better idea to seal our deal. Walking around the table... That's crazy, I'm not reading that. That's wild. See you around, Naruto. And remember, you get that. She briefly gestured to herself before continuing. And so much more when you come find me. Don't keep me waiting too long. She gave a last wink before strutting off. He couldn't help but follow the extra sway she put in her hip. Dang, he quickly scowled when he realized she knew his name. Must have heard that guy call me Uzumaki. Here I was hoping to keep that a secret. Now that she knows my name, I probably won't be able to get away with never claiming that night of reserved. I have a feeling she'd hunt me down and demand I provide the work I've paid here for. Her pride would demand no less. Despite his irritation, he couldn't help but think the last of that fondly. She'd earned a spot on the list of people he liked. He'd enjoy spending time with her as a friend for certain. Of course, she'd never let them be friends until... Oh my god. That'd be an odd beginning to a friendship. I am sure. And again, if getting her as a friend is the result of a night, he gave a grin to the space he had last seen her occupy. The thought of getting what I paid for doesn't seem too bad. The idea of spending a night with her didn't feel uncomfortable any longer, but his oh my god. Listen, I know the thumbnail doesn't look like much, but it took me 4 hours to make, so please like this video. Let's get into it. The sweet relief that flooded his soul was indescribable, a peace so delicious that he couldn't help but release a short laugh. Not tonight, thank the gods. For 2 weeks, his dreams had been plagued by a sky of two suns, glaring down on him as he sunk deep into an ocean of oblivion. But this was different. It was by no means pleasant, but he would take what he could get. He had for this night alone escaped the emerald and blue eyes, hair like sunset and hair like noon, skin as soft and pale as clouds, had been hidden from their visage in this new sanctuary. And for that he was grateful. Cold, murky water of unsanitary gray splashed around his stationary feet, gently urging him further into this world. With a soft and sad smile, he followed it through the rooms of this flooded basement, along walls of crumbling yellow and under the occasional flickering light or hole to the surface through which came the occasional scattered sunbeam. It shields me from them, but undeniably, they are still there. Even the cursory thought was enough to drag up memories he'd rather not deal with, and in response, the piercing sunlight increased in intensity, burning his flesh almost as soon as he passed each ray of light. With a hiss, he dropped, splashing the icy water onto the reddened flesh to dull the pain. The smell of decay hit him hard, but it was drowned out by quickly receding pain, leaving him gasping in the filth, clutching one arm, half melted to his chest. Why do thoughts of you hurt me so much? It had been 2 weeks since their departure, and yet his heart still ached painfully in his chest. During the day, it wasn't too bad. A million distractions and other worries serving as a buffer to reduce it to a dull throbbing, more easily ignored. At night, however, there was no escape under the watchful stare of the moon, or within the bittersweet arms of Hypnos. His dreams were plagued with them, his two sons, two angels, and even the sweetest smiles that graced their faces left his soul screaming in sorrowful agony, a wretched song of misery and despair, pain and loss, and worst of all, an empty hopelessness that gnawed on his heart a little more each day. That was to say nothing for the nights in which their smiles would disappear, replaced by cruel smirks or scowls of disgust. Those looks would only remind him of the questions that still lingered unanswered. Why did they leave? Why didn't they tell him? Why was I locked out of the house? Will they come back? Do they hate me? He couldn't hold it any longer as he released a wail that shook the foundations of this strange memory-inducing world before he was reduced to choking sobs that wrecked his tiny body. As he lay trembling in the freezing water, he couldn't help but think it would have been better for him had the Kibi chakra ended him on that night. Another shudder wrecked her body, sorrow touching in ways that, while unsettling, were not completely unpleasant. There was a bittersweet quality to his suffering, his pain, and with every second her disgust with herself grew just a little more. A sigh passed through soft ruby lips. Her head rested lazily against the cold bars of her prison. Her delicate fingers gripped the iron rods more tightly as another sob reached her pointed ears, her lips moving into a frown. For years she had resided within this new seal, growing used to the unique discomfort it provided. Unlike the previous two, where she was painfully bound in her released form, now she was kept from releasing, trapped in this sewer-like basement in her default human form, when she and quite possibly the seal knew it would be much more bearable within her fox form. Once more a sob made its way into her chamber, telling her that the boy had yet to move, and she found her mind drifting to thoughts of him. She'd known of him, of course. She was there when he had been conceived, had been with him as he grew from egg to tiny human, and she had been there when he and his sister had been brought into this world. Should she be honest with herself, she didn't much like that part. She'd gotten used to feeling those two, and there was a certain camaraderie with the three of them being trapped within her current jailer, but then they had left. There was an emptiness that followed their departure, followed quickly by bitter jealousy, and then like them she was once again brought into the world. And she felt guilty for being so angered at the tiny hairless apes that she had spent 9 months with. 2 red eyes had turned the guilt into new anger, and the anger into rage. Before she knew it, she had slaughtered thousands and wrecked a good portion of the village that had kept her imprisoned for the past decades. She had been quite pleased, and then she was, once again, sealed into an Uzumaki woman. There was more to that, of course, for the man who had sealed her was no Uzumaki, and was exhausted from his efforts to defend his beloved village. As such, he would not have been able to seal her entirely within the 8 trigram seal. Even with aid from being known as the Shinigami, there just wasn't enough room. Well, there was enough room, just not enough for him to be able to seal me within. Indeed, she had fit perfectly within the space, so perfectly that the gate to the seal would not have been able to move into place, left dangling before her within the seal. It had been child's play for her to get free. Namikaze Minato had been more clever than she'd given him credit for though. He had not attempted to use the seal to keep her locked away, but rather he had used it to purely contain her. The real lock had been placed around the entirety of the 8 trigram seal, to the point that should she somehow accomplish the miraculous feat of breaking through the first, she'd still be contained within the actual lock, a lock that was not left unguarded. She was present when he completed that part, watched as he had the Shinigami brand his son on the left side of the boy's chest, bore witness as a second seal was applied. Minato had actually gazed up into her eyes, pinned as she was by the great Toad Boss, and acknowledged her sentience as he smiled, and proudly proclaimed, "A gift, you see, from father to son. I pass on to him my greatest legacy, my final masterpiece." Even as the cold dread had settled within her stomach, she had understood. She knew exactly what that was. To think he had actually managed to finish it had been stupefying. Such a thing shouldn't have been even possible. It had no right to exist. Even within the hollow dreams of mankind, it was something that encroached upon the realm of the gods themselves, something only confirmed when the Shinigami bristled at the sight of such a seal. As small as it was to begin, being placed upon the child's right forearm. "Look upon him, great Kitsune," Minato had begun, "and bear witness unto he who shall be your warden. Feast your eyes on this fragile innocence and realize that with every simple breath he draws, he defies the very realms of heaven." To this day, she still couldn't decide if he was mocking her or speaking purely as a proud father. But she knew regardless that he had spoken the truth, so much so that she had not even attempted to break free from this place. It was beyond hopeless. That's what brought her here now, trapped within a cage beneath whatever this building was supposed to represent, sealed within a young girl, and listening to the girl's brother as he emptied the pain of his heart into her prison. "I suppose that means there are now 2 of us who suffer in here." Suffering brought her mind back to the past years she had spent in here. Yes, she had suffered, but it had been more her pride than anything else. Here was a boy whose pain fueled the seal, and if she didn't know better, she'd say the seal itself was enjoying it. Another feeling filled her, one of warmth and happiness, a carefree breeze under the summer sun, Indeed, it was a son, one of the sons that the very thought of had driven her warden to this state. Quickly, his own pain drove the feeling from her, and just as quickly it returned. To think that he was here, wishing her chakra could have just ended his life while his sister was of gallivanting across the elemental nations with their mother, was just sad. Now that she thought of it, however, the QB had never really felt any sorrow or pain over these years until she had found herself connected to her warden. Just as he described her, his sister was like a small sun, almost always warm and happy. Even now, knowing that they had left her brother behind, she was as cheerful as the spring. So for 8 years, she had felt nothing but the joy of her container. It had always sickened her to know her jailer was so carefree while she was trapped down here in the darkness. And then he had crashed into the seal. Struck by some of the chakra that had been siphoned off of her for years, she had called out for him in both surprise and alarm, as her senses were flooded by what it must have been like to be burned alive by her own chakra. She was more surprised when the connection remained, his own part of the seal using her chakra as a median to bind the two together through space and time. His feelings had proceeded to flow through the connection: confusion, fear, sadness, and worry. She felt his adrenaline spike as he fought for life in the snatch and run gone wrong, felt his relief and weariness when he had ended it, and even felt a small spark of hope and happiness when he had made an acquaintance. Sadness, however, was the most prominent of feelings, nearly drowning her, and even though she was focusing only on his feelings lately, the occasional spike of happiness from his sister would manage to come through. The strange mix of gladness and sorrow was tantalizing to her, a little guilty pleasure she would never admit. She had come to enjoy his sadness both for that and for the change in her otherwise stagnant environment, but she did not take any pleasure in the fact that he was sad, suffering alone when he had spent the entirety of his life in the company of those he loved for far more than himself. Kushina, if only you could see the pain you bring him. She had ended millions in her time, and yet she gave a snort as she thought, I could probably be a better mother to him than you. She froze at the thought. The very notion was ridiculous, unfeasible, incomprehensible, but maybe, just maybe, it would work. To not just befriend her warden, but to gain his complete trust by replacing his two sons with herself, to become the guide he so desperately needed at this moment, to become the mother of this human child. Well, we'll just have to see where this goes now, won't we? Crimson eyes flashed eerily as a chilling grin parted her ruby lips. Sarutobi Hiruzen was not pleased, but he could not fault them, no matter how much he wanted to. Uzumaki Naruto was a civilian, despite his clan, and thusly the hospital had no duty to inform him of the boy's release a fortnight ago. The Kibi's chakra mixed with his Uzumaki healing factor had left him in the clear. With no reason to hold him any longer, they let him go, without informing the Hokage. The Hokage thought that the boy had spent the past 2 weeks under the care of the hospital while he had been busy both trying to figure out what the Yandame Hokage had applied to his son and get in contact with his mother Uzumaki Kushina. It had been a failure on both accounts. Kushina had just left the fire capital and started on her way towards her ancestral home of Uzu. There was no one to send the message to in Uzu, and that meant he had to send it to a future destination and hope that they went there next. He had certainly been given a list of where they were to be going, but he knew Kushina well enough to know how easily distracted she got, especially when excited. Chances are she'd skip back and forth between places on his list at a whim, later claiming that she never specified in which order she'd visit things on the list. In this case, such a thing was not in her best interest. She'd have plenty of time to regret her travel methods later, however, as there were certainly more pressing matters to attend to, like her son. He still thought it had been a foolish notion to leave while her son was attending his first academy day, none the wiser, especially after promising to pick him up afterwards. If there were two things that Uzumaki took very seriously, they were family and promises. In one fell swoop, Kushina had broken both. He knew her reason, of course, and understood them, but he knew without a doubt that there had to be a better way to set about doing it. Leaving him to figure out what had happened on his own was rather thoughtless and cruel. The thought of him alone brought up the other reason he found himself displeased at the moment. She had left the boy with someone, but it was indirectly. Kushina expected the boy to go straight to her older student, Yuhi Kurenai, whom the Uzumaki woman saw as another daughter. She did not tell the boy to go to her. She did not have Kurenai pick him up at the academy, and from what he had gathered during his talk with Kurenai, she had not been in any way instructed to find the boy, only to take care of him when he came to stay with her. The boy had not been at Kurenai, and it was not hard to understand why when the woman would shift uncomfortably at the mere mention of his name. There was no doubt that the boy had picked up on such discomfort, and as such, he would never think to visit the woman for help. Kushina was either oblivious or ignorant. Oblivious to the two's discomfort around one another, or ignorant in thinking her son would approach the Genjutsu mistress despite it. No matter the reason, he had not gone and Kurenai had not searched for him, even after the news of his violent rejection from the clan compound had circled through Konohagakure. Monkey, he called for his own personal Anbu. Locate and retrieve Uzumaki Naruto. If he will not come, trail him and report back to me his current place of residence so that I may speak with him. The monkey masked Anbu gave a quick bow and vanished to complete his assigned task. Rubbing his face tiredly, Hiruzen lit his pipe and took a single deep drag, exhaling to hide his weary sigh. He needed to make sure the boy was alright, especially considering how quickly winter was coming and the fact that he had never been in his own before. On his own. The last thing the old Sarutobi wanted was for his successor's young son to freeze to death because his mother had completely sealed the house. She hadn't mentioned that part in the plan. In fact, from what he could remember, the ex-Jinchuriki had been expecting her son to stay there and go to her students whenever he needed help with something. Something must have changed in the last minute, or perhaps the seal had just malfunctioned, but Naruto suffered regardless. He could only imagine how Naruto must have been feeling, left by his family without so much as a goodbye, knowing there was no one he could really turn to. Well, mused Hiruzen, he could have come to me, though I suppose going to the Hokage because you find yourself homeless and alone sounds rather odd. He was always a bright child. He could think better than bring something he thought of as unimportant to the rest of the village well-being before me. We were never close enough for him to think of me as anything more than the Hokage. It was a sad truth for the man. He had always been close to the boy's mother and had become akin to a segregated grandfather to the young Naruto, but there was always a distance between himself and young Naruto. It may have stemmed from treating the boy in the same manner as his sister, like a child of his age, instead of like the mature young man he was. It may have been because the boy really didn't reach out beyond his family, not needing anything else in life, but Hiruzen suspected the distance may have been caused because the boy did not see him as Sarutobi, like his mother and sister, but rather as his future commander. In his presence, Naruto would never meet his eyes, always kept them focused to the floor when addressed the wall behind the Hokage's head, staring straight forward. The young boy bowed every time they met and saluted every time his name was called. The boy had an almost unsettling air of professionalism when within the presence of his cage, and while Hiruzen may have wished for more of the Kage, I don't know why I said that. And while Hiruzen may have wished for more of that from his shinobi, it left a bad taste in his mouth for one so young to do so, especially considering how close he considered himself to the child's family. That was goofily worded. He drove such thoughts from his mind with another deep inhalation of that gas. It's not the time to focus on that right now. All that matters is that he's safe and, if possible, happy. The boy has The boy wasn't much of a child before they left, probably trying to be the man of the house, but with them gone, I fear his childhood will be quick to follow. He reason didn't want that, not in the slightest. Jesus. He wanted all the children of his village to enjoy a happy upbringing, or at least one in which they could be the children they were supposed to be. 8 years old would be far too young for a child to be ended, and is much too soon for a man to be born. He reasoned prayed that some of the boy's already fading innocence might still be saved before a boy was lost and a man emerged. He did not have much faith in his prayers. He was never a child, just sheltered. Perhaps it would not be entirely a bad thing. With that thought in mind, he leaned back in his chair, unsure if the creaking was from the furniture or his old bones, and waited patiently for his Ambu to return. How hard could it be to locate one young boy, even if the sun had hidden itself beneath the horizon? He gave a slight chuckle. It might actually prove a challenge for his Ambu, and one they may or may not appreciate. No matter, he thought, staring at his office window at the nightscape of his beautiful village. If they can't find him tonight, they'll certainly find him at the academy in the morning. Iruka hadn't raised any hell about a missing student, so I can only assume he's been attending. Actually brought a frown to his face, and he had to wonder if the young Chunin ever knew Naruto had been released. He'd have to look into it soon, especially if his Anbu somehow failed to locate the boy. He knew, however, that Monkey would recruit every registered shinobi and possibly even a large handful of civilians in his search for the boy before even considering reporting back empty-handed. That's why he chose him, after all. Awful couldn't even begin to describe how she felt as she sat in her kitchen, her cold dinner untouched before her, and the only illumination provided by a small dim lamp that she had been meaning to replace for months now. Miserable falls short too, she mused, crimson eyes gazing out her window. The Hokage had visited her in the afternoon, looking to the boy that had been expected to be with her. He left disappointed. She knew the boy was supposed to come to her when he couldn't locate his family. She was the one who was supposed to break the news to him and take care of him in their absence. He was a good kid, but a helpless mother's boy. He wouldn't know how to take care of himself with her gone, and yet he didn't come straight to me. I must have made quite an impression. She was honestly a little disappointed when the boy didn't show up. Surely she was better than nothing. Learning he was in the hospital had put that fear to rest. Hearing that he had been released and yet not having him come to her brought it back. Had she truly alienated the child's? She should have visited him in the hospital, should have taken him in, but she was scared. No, terrified to do so. But what many thought, it wasn't that she couldn't stand to the presence of the boy, not that it made her uncomfortable, but rather that she felt too relaxed and too comfortable in his presence. It was the sense of ease that put her on guard. She had only felt a similar comfort around Hokage, Minato, who had been her father figure, but it was nowhere on this. This is weird. The sheer contentment she felt in his presence was almost enough to lull her to sleep all on its own, and powerful Jonin Kunoichi or not, he was an he was an adorable child. You guys are... She could think of nothing better than using him as a teddy bear for afternoon naps after he returned from the academy each day. She could not stand it. She was supposed to be one of Konoha's most powerful kunoichi, a rare genjutsu user unparalleled within the village of the Leaf, and yet there was a helpless as a kitten when it came to the son of her sensei. Helpless to the boy she called brother. His warm chakra was a perfect blend of Minato's and Kushina's, as were his looks. He posed his father's mind and his mother's love, a little ball of sunshine that tried to support everyone he held dear. She was not one of them. The dagger pierced deeply into her heart. There was little more she wanted than being his big sister, or his aunt, or anything really. She just wanted to be able to help him, to be one of his precious people, and yet she could not bring herself to relax in his presence, unable to fight down her traitorous shinobi instincts that screamed, anything that can bring your guard down so is dangerous, a threat, something to be eliminated. She could not count the many times she had been forced to restrain her reflexes to attack him, did not know how often she would be forced to put back the kunai she had found herself about to throw and completely remove all weapons on her persons just to remain in the same room as him. But he probably did. He was not a fool. He knew she did not like being in his presence, though he probably didn't know her reasons, and he was also perceptive far beyond his years. She knew he had seen her barely stop herself from lashing out on more than one occasion. He had probably seen them all, but he was also a child, perhaps not much in mind but in body and experience. He couldn't know he had such an effect on her, or even why. He didn't have any shinobi instincts of his own yet. He would only see a woman who could not stand in his presence to the point she would have to physically restrain herself lest she toast or baths him. The thought alone brought tears to her eyes. Why can't you see that I don't want to hurt you? I don't hate you, I just want to be there. I want to help. Why won't you let me? Because you want to kill him, lady. Oh my god. She knew it wasn't him. He wasn't keeping her away, and she was. Always giving him disdainful looks and giving him the cold shoulder in hopes of driving him away so she wouldn't have to deal with the issue. She didn't want to do it in the first place. If I had just spent more time with him, became close, I could probably be holding him. Tears began streaming down her cheeks, but were quickly stopped as she clamped down on her own emotions. I have no right to sit here pitying myself for not having him if I still could bring myself to go get him. You know what? I'm not reading the rest of this chapter.
I don't even know how he's been living lately. The image of Naruto lying in a box in some dark alleyway, shivering in the cold Konoha night made her chest tighten painfully. Her resolve to go find him grew as she stood up, ready to be what she needed to be for the boy, but another stray thought crossed her mind, leaving her to freeze before she could take her first step. She approached the box, looking in to see his pale skin and signature red hair, but as she reached in he flinched back, pressing himself as tightly as he could to the back wall. "No, please, don't hurt me," the boy cried. Biting back a gasp, she shook her head. "I'm not going to hurt you, I'm here to take care of you." "Lies," he shouted. "I know you hate me, you want to toaster bath me, I've seen you go for your kunai whenever you see me." The boy whimpered, tears streaming down his cheeks and soaking his cardboard home. "Please, I won't go near you again, I'll stay away from Kaya-san and Naruto-chan, I know you all hate me, just let me live and I'll never be a bother to any of you ever again." "What?" She choked back a lump in her throat, her hands trembling and her chest tightening as if the Shinigami himself was grabbing hold of her soul. "I promise, I won't hurt you, just come with me, please." When he made no move aside from frightened shivers and whimpers, she grabbed for him, gripping tightly his ripped shirt. "No. No. Please, let me go." She found herself getting frustrated as he squirmed and writhed in terror, desperate to get away. Couldn't he see she just wanted to help him? Why wouldn't he let her help him? Frustration grew to anger and her rage spilled over as he finally managed to escape her grasp. "Fine," she shouted. "If you want to stay away, it just makes it easier on me." She turned and began walking away with a huff before she heard him speak up softly. The low, gentle tone was almost solemn and instantly banished any anger within her. She turned and froze. "So, if I was gone, it would be easier on people? Kaya-san and Naruto-chan didn't want me, it'd probably be better if they didn't have to worry about running into me." No. She must have dropped a kunai in the struggle to remove him from his box, and it cheerfully reflected the pale light of the moon as he held it to his neck. No. He gave her a small smile, filled with such bittersweet sorrow she couldn't believe it was an 8-year-old boy standing before her. "At least I'll be able to make you happy. I'm glad you'll be the last thing I see. No. Goodbye." It went in fast and hard, no hesitance as he toaster bathed the tip through his neck and up into his head, his smile never leaving his face. It was not the smile that caught her eyes, however, as his amethyst gaze had completely captured her own ruby stare. She was unable to look away as those bright purple orbs grew dim and cold, all traces of light and life vanishing into the night. Cold horror took hold of her heart and soul, a feeling of such anguish that for a moment she forgot that she was standing in her apartment and staring into space. Gracelessly she fell back into her chair, placing her head in her hands as she quietly wept. Try as she might, she couldn't banish the image of his toaster-bathed face from her mind, his eyes empty and his smile just as sorrowful as it had been before the kunao. It was a hard realization that hid her own cowardice, and she couldn't seem to overcome the horrors of her heart and mind born from fear of losing someone she had never had. The painful truth took hold, bringing with them even more salty tears. I can't do it. That will conclude Act 2. I hope to see you in my theater again for Chapter 3.